My father refused to walk me down the aisle because his adored daughter had an opening party that day, but he called me desperate when I got a replacement. For a long time, I always knew my parents loved my older sister Vicky more than me. She was the planned daughter while I was the result of an accidental pregnancy just 10 months later. They probably didn't even want me but decided to keep the pregnancy anyway. My mother's parents had passed away before I was born, but my father's parents were very much alive, so they took on a significant role in my upbringing. Sadness and failure were constants in my life, providing the love and support I often felt I lacked from my own parents. I remember so many times when my parents left me behind with my grandparents and only took me back to my sister on trips. When I was young, I didn't care because it was fun to live with my grandparents. But as I grew up, when I was 6 or 7, I realized how unfair it was. But my problem wasn't only with my parents, it was also with my sister Vicky. Although I didn't harbor a grudge against Vicky, I couldn't help but feel like an unwanted compliment in the family. She also knew it and made me feel like a stranger every day in my own home. I always competed with her for everything, whether it was for grades, the attention of our parents, or even the smallest accomplishments. It felt like a constant battle for validation, and I was always on the losing side because my parents always preferred her. As a result, I felt really inferior and we never fully understood each other. Our relationship seemed more like a perpetual competition, with her always coming out victorious. On one occasion, she wanted to be friends with a group of girls, but because she was a nerd, she was afraid to approach them. One of the girls and I had art classes together, so I introduced myself to the rest of the group and we all used to hang out together. Vicky was so jealous of this that she made my parents talk to me to include her. Also, whenever I was with them, I tried to avoid conflict, but my mother called me selfish, while my father said she was my sister and I should take care of her. I reluctantly accepted and introduced Vicky to the rest of the girls. Now, Vicky doesn't have many friends, so she may seem too enthusiastic. I was constantly trying to impress the girls in our group, often becoming annoyed. Despite her efforts, she found it difficult to find her place among them, and the tension between Vicky and the other girls was always palpable. For example, one of the girls was interested in a boy, so Vicky took it upon herself to approach the boy and let him know that she liked the girl. He laughed because he was not interested and went and told everyone, which embarrassed the girl. After this, the girls told me clearly that they didn't want her to join our meetings, so I accepted. However, Vicky didn't accept it. She threw a tantrum when she found out that the girls wanted nothing to do with her and insisted to our parents that I shouldn't spend time with these bad girls either, since I was her sister and should defend her. I refused and told her it was her fault that I didn't. They wanted to be friends with her, but my parents, as always, supported her. They gave me a talk about how Vicky had no bad intentions and that I should try to convince the girls to forgive Vicky, but that if they didn't, then I should stay away from them too. I refused and stood firm. I liked hanging out with them and, unlike Vicky, I wasn't going to sacrifice my friendships in any way. I told my parents that I had had enough and that it wasn't my responsibility to find friends for Vicky and what my parents did was follow us. I told my parents that I had had enough and that it wasn't my responsibility to find friends for Vicky. My parents got mad and turned their backs on me for weeks, but I'm glad I stood my ground. This group of girls has remained my friends to this day and they are basically like my sisters. I have cried with them, laughed with them, and shared some of the most significant moments of my life. That wasn't the only reason Vicky came to hate me. There was also another incident with a boy she was in love with, a boy I had no idea about and who sat in some classes with me because we were friends. He tried to invite me to the prom, but I politely declined because I was already going with someone I liked. Later, when Vicky found out, she made a big fuss about it by telling my parents how she always told me the things she wanted and that she was in love with the boy, knowing what she had been feeling for months. She used a lot of unpleasant words that no one should tell their own sister and told my parents how she wished I wasn't her sister. My mother stood by her, telling me that what she had done was wrong and that as a sister, I should respect the girls' code. I tried to tell them that I wasn't even interested in the boy and that I had turned down his invitation, so she was free to ask him if she wanted to. But Vicky refused to let it pass. Looking back, I think she knew the guy would have rejected her anyway, so she just wanted to get even with me because she had invited me instead of her. Once, my dad took me out for ice cream, telling me he wanted to spend time with me as a father and daughter. This had never happened before, so I was really happy. However, he started asking me a lot of questions as if my boyfriend and I were being careful, if my boyfriend came from a good family, or if we used drugs. I was shocked by his line of questions and asked him what he meant by all that. That's when my dad revealed that Vicky had been making up stories, telling my parents for months that I was on drugs and drinking alcohol with my boyfriend. This was a complete lie, and I showed my dad my phone to verify that Vicky was lying. Later, when my dad confronted her about all the lies, she tried to justify that no one our age just spends time with a guy and that I was hiding everyone's stuff. I was so angry that I yelled at her for trying to create an unnecessary problem and told her it wasn't my fault she didn't have anyone to date, but I needed to move on with my life. Vicky didn't accept it and if you are liking it, follow us for part 2. I was so angry that Vicky made things up about me that I yelled at her for trying to create an unnecessary problem and told her it wasn't my fault that she had no one to date. But I needed to move on with my life. Vicky didn't accept it and hit me. This came out of nowhere as she had never been physically violent before. My nose started to bleed as I fell to the floor, grabbing my face in pain. My parents rushed me to the hospital and all the time begged me not to file a complaint against Vicky. They said I would ruin her life. While I was sitting in the back seat, grabbing my face, Vicky didn't even worry or apologize. Later, when the teacher asked me about the incident, I told her the truth and she called Child Protection Services. My parents were furious with me for involving Child Protection Services, seeing it as a betrayal of family loyalty. In their eyes, Vicky's actions were seen as a mere accident, not justifying such a drastic intervention. They pleaded with the authorities, insisting that Vicky was not a danger to me, that her actions were out of character. In the end, Vicky was released but warned my parents that they would be closely monitoring our situation in case other accidents occurred. As you can imagine, Vicky was really affected, just like my parents. Later, my parents told me they were disappointed in me for trying to ruin my sister's life. My mother started crying and told me how I was tearing the family apart by involving other people. My father's disappointment was palpable, his words were always full of reproach. As I questioned my decision to escalate the situation, I told them firmly that I wanted Vicky out of my life, and they agreed. I felt guilty for involving the authorities, but for the first time, I felt safe in my own home. Once Vicky had been formally warned, my parents had a separate conversation with her, and since that day, she stopped talking to me completely. I preferred this much more than having her constantly playing dead or trying to insert herself into my life. When my grandparents learned of this incident, they asked me to pack my things so I could live with them for the rest of high school. They informed my parents, who did not protest much, so I went to live with my grandparents. Unlike my parents' home, I felt safe and loved there. The remaining days of high school went well, and I made lasting memories with my friends. My parents never visited me or called during that time. I knew they were happy with their beloved daughter, so I never tried to contact them, even though it hurt that they could rule me out so easily, as if I were nothing. When I graduated from high school, my parents made the day about Vicky. They didn't even congratulate me or approach me. I felt like a stranger to them. Although it hurt that I could be dismissed as easily as if it were nothing, when I graduated from high school, my parents made the day about Vicky. They didn't even congratulate me or approach me. I felt like I was a stranger to them. However, my grandparents were there and scolded my parents for being so obvious about their favoritism. I don't know what my grandfather told them, but my dad then approached me later. I later discovered that I was accepted into a good university with a full scholarship. I was very happy about that because I was afraid to ask my parents for financial help. I informed my grandparents about this, and they invited me out to dinner at a good restaurant. After dinner, my teacher posted pictures of me on her Facebook account, writing a long caption about how proud she was of me for being an exceptional student. Our relatives found out early and joined in the congratulations. I thought some of them might have told my parents, but they had no idea about all this. Instead of feeling happy about it, my mother called me the next day to tell me that Vicky had locked herself in her room crying because she had not been accepted to any college, and that I was consciously trying to make my sister feel bad about her grades. Speaking to all of our relatives, she told me this was all my fault because Vicky was apparently depressed after the incident with Child Protective Services, which had pushed her to get bad grades. I was so incredibly devastated that my own mother could blame me for something like that. So, that was the last time I talked to her. My grandparents helped me move into my dorm because my high school boyfriend's college was far away from me. We were done, so I went into college single. The breakup had been difficult, but I was excited to meet new people. This is where I met Rob. He and I were both freshmen, and we both spent half of our days in the library. Rob was different from anyone I had met before. He is a quiet person and liked to study, just like me. We quickly found commonalities in our shared love for college. As the weeks turned into months, our friendship blossomed into something deeper, and I realized that I had developed feelings for Rob that went beyond simple friendship. Being extroverted, I was quite direct about my feelings for Rob and was surprised to learn that he felt the same way. We started dating and have been together for 8 years. My grandparents have met Rob, and they just love him. I have met Rob's parents, who also treat me like their own daughter. Rob's mother has even confessed to me how she has always wished to have a daughter, so she is glad that Rob met a wonderful person like me. To be honest, this is the first time I've been surrounded by family members who appreciate me and don't hold a grudge. I've told Rob stories from my childhood, and he listens to me and knows what my relationship with Vicky is like. Over the past 8 years, my parents have barely contacted me, except to send me an occasional birthday message if they remembered, but that's all. Recently, Rob and I got engaged. He proposed to me while we were together. If you are liking it, follow us for part 3. Robbie and I recently got engaged. We got married while we were hiking to our usual spot to watch the sunrise, and it was a dream proposal. It was so sweet to see how nervous I was when I was asked the question, and I had no hesitation in my mind when I accepted the proposal. I posted pictures of my engagement on my Instagram and also informed my family about it. They were so happy for me and congratulated us on our future. The news must have spread because my parents called me out of nowhere to congratulate me. I thought it was just a casual conversation, as we hadn't spoken for years. They asked me about my life, my work, and my apartment before my dad directly asked me if he could walk me down the aisle. I was surprised by his sudden question, as a few moments before, I didn't even know what company he worked for. I told him that I hadn't thought about it yet, and my dad told me it would be embarrassing if I didn't invite him and that others would question us about it, so it would be better if he walked me down the aisle. I told my parents that I didn't even know if I was going to invite them to my wedding since we hadn't been in contact. This upset my parents. My mother began to tell me how disappointed she was with my answer, emphasizing the importance of family and tradition. She continued telling me how my parents would always be there for me, no matter what, and that I should leave the past behind. Part of me was tempted to listen to my parents and accept my dad's offer because I wanted our relationship to be repaired, but another part of me was fearful of opening myself up again to possible disappointments and hurt. However, I was about to start a new chapter in my life in a few months, so I told him I contacted my dad, who could walk me down the aisle, and he seemed thrilled. During the wedding preparations, I contacted my friends from high school, with whom I had always maintained contact despite the physical distance that had grown between us due to our careers. I told them how I wanted the group to get together and that I wanted them to be my bridesmaids. There were many expressions of happiness and congratulations, and without hesitation, they accepted my invitation to be part of my wedding party as it was an opportunity to get all together again. We all planned to go to Las Vegas to celebrate my bachelorette party while Rob had a separate bachelor party with his friends. My friends and I posted a lot of pictures of the party, and in general, they all had a great time. However, when I returned home, my parents called me to let me know how disappointed they were that I had not invited Vicky to be part of the celebration. I told them that there was no way I would have involved Vicky in my bachelorette party and that I didn't want her to be part of my life. This surprised my parents, and they asked me what I meant, so I clarified that Vicky's actions, particularly her history of lies and gossip, had left me deeply hurt and distrustful of her intentions. I could not imagine inviting her to such an intimate occasion as my bachelorette party, knowing that her presence would make my party less enjoyable. I also informed my parents that this was the reason why she was not invited to my wedding either. Hearing this, my parents complained that I had no right to exclude my sister from my wedding and that it was my duty as her sister to include her in such important events. They told me that Vicky was excited to meet me after learning that I was getting married. I was confused and asked my parents who gave them that idea, since we hadn't even talked to each other for a long time, but my parents ignored my concerns, saying that this was not how sisters should behave. I told them they had to understand that my relationship with Vicky is complicated after all that has happened, and I just don't feel comfortable having her as part of my wedding, especially since she has never apologized to me for everything she put me through. However, my parents generally ignored my words. My mother kept saying how she wanted everything to be worked out and that I should make an effort to invite Vicky. My father insisted that our relatives would talk about why my sister was not invited and that this would end up affecting my wedding. However, I knew it was better not to give in to their demands, so I didn't give in. I told them it was okay for people to talk behind my back and question my character, as long as I was surrounded by people I liked and trusted during my wedding. My mother then asked if my fiancé would be fine with this and also tried to use the in-laws angle, suggesting that they would judge me for being so incredibly cruel as to exclude my own sister from my wedding. I laughed and informed my parents that my fiancé and my in-laws knew the dynamics of my family and that none of them would care if Vicky was present or not. I was pressured to reconsider, with suggestions about the importance of family unity and forgiveness. But I didn't give in even an inch, as I was not willing to compromise my own well-being for the sake of appeasing others. In the end, we agreed to disagree, each of us clinging to our own perspectives. My parents told me they needed to think things over, and we ended our conversation. I briefed my fiancé about this because I felt a little guilty about confronting my parents, and he fully supported me. He told me that I shouldn't be forced to invite anyone I didn't want there, and that my parents, as usual, were trying to make me feel guilty. Since this conversation, I have felt a little better about my decision and have been distracted by the wedding preparations as my wedding is fast approaching. Last week, my dad called me to inform me that he had thought long and hard and that he and Mom would no longer be attending the wedding. Before I could react, he went on to say that this also meant that he would not walk me down the aisle. I asked him if there was a specific reason, and he informed me that Vicky would be moving to a new location soon, which my parents had helped her find. Since I was going to exclude her from the wedding, she had decided to throw a housewarming party that same day, so they would attend that instead of my wedding. I couldn't believe what my father was telling me because I wasn't being invited in the first place, let alone being walked down the aisle. But he insisted it was his decision not to do so. My own sister's housewarming party had priority over my wedding, which was a hard blow and a continuation of what I had felt for years. I just told him I understood and hung up the call. Though I tried to act brave in front of my father, deep down the pain of rejection affected me. When I told Rob, I was furious at how insensitive my parents could be after they were the ones who insisted on being invited. He gave me the idea that I should ask my grandmother, as she and Grandpa were more present in my life than my parents. I agreed, so I called them and asked if they would be willing to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. I couldn't hold back my emotions as I asked my grandmother, "You and Grandpa have always been there for me," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "You have been more than just support, you have been like parents to me, and I cannot imagine anyone else I would want by my side on my wedding day." My grandmother didn't even hesitate before saying yes. She told me how honored she would be to walk me down the aisle, and unlike my parents, she wouldn't disappoint me. Her words soothed me, and at that moment, I felt a deep sense of peace. With them by my side, I knew I had a family that loved me unconditionally and accepted me with all my imperfections. I also talked to my father-in-law about this, and Rob's parents assured me that they didn't care if my parents didn't attend, and that regardless of their presence, they were happy to witness and support our union. My wedding is in 2 days, and today I woke up to several missed calls from my dad. I called him back, thinking it was an emergency. When he answered, he asked if it was true that my grandmother would walk me down the aisle. I said yes, it was true. Then my dad got angry, saying how disrespectful it was to have asked my grandmother. I reminded him that he was the one who decided not to come to my wedding, so I didn't understand why he was so upset. My dad continued yelling at me about how he and mom were just trying to make me see the error of my actions, and that they thought by declining the invitation they would teach me a lesson. He went on to say how he and mom had raised me and paid for my food and education, so my grandmother had no right to replace him. I tried to reason with him by explaining that my grandparents had been there for me in ways he and mom never were, but he wouldn't listen. He also told me that I had done nothing but push everyone away from me and that it was all my fault. I don't think I've done anything wrong in this situation. I understand everyone would have done the same, but since the subreddit requires me to ask the question, am I the bad guy for asking my grandmother to walk me down the aisle instead of my father? Update 1. Many people agreed that I was not in the wrong. I received a lot of advice and suggestions on how to deal with this situation. I agree that I need to permanently cut off contact with my parents because their constant indecision is exhausting and is beginning to affect my mental health. I don't want them in my life when they have consistently shown that Vicky is always their first priority. If you are liking it, follow us for part 4. Sorry for the lack of updates this past month, but I have been quite busy since my wedding. First of all, yes, my wedding was quite good with my grandmother by my side as I walked down the hallway. Despite the absence of my parents, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of sadness when exchanging vows with Rob, committing to spend the rest of our lives together. My friends and I danced all night, and I can't begin to describe how important it is to stay in touch with your childhood friends no matter what, because sometimes they are your chosen family. During the reception, I felt a slight pain realizing that my parents were not there to share this special moment, especially when I saw Rob's parents and cousins giving speeches for him. However, I take comfort in the knowledge that I made the right decision for myself by prioritizing my own well-being and happiness. Some of my friends gave speeches sharing memories of our experiences and the bond that had supported us both in good times and bad. In the days following the wedding, Rob and I went on a honeymoon that his parents had paid for as a wedding gift. I spent all my days just relaxing and enjoying myself with my husband. I feel so excited every time I look at Rob and realize he is now married to me. As I mentioned earlier, I cut off all contact with my parents by blocking them everywhere. I didn't bother to send them an explanation because frankly, they don't even deserve it. I have no idea if Vicky really had a housewarming party that day or if it was just an excuse for my parents not to attend my wedding, but at this point, I don't care. I wish them and their beloved daughter nothing but the best. Update 3. I didn't intend to share more after my last update, but something unexpected just happened, and I think you all deserve to know. I hadn't checked my email in the last month due to my wedding and honeymoon, but today, while I was checking emails, I found an email from Vicky. I don't even know how she found my email address, and was completely surprised. I doubted whether to open her email or just delete it without reading it. But as the saying goes, curiosity killed the cat. Inside was an extensive message from Vicky expressing her regret for our strained relationship and her desire to reconcile, recognizing the mistakes she had made in the past, admitting that she had been selfish and immature. Vicky apologized for the pain she had caused me over the years and expressed a genuine desire to make amends. She continued to write how happy she feels about me now that I am married and that she wishes me nothing but the best. I received the email begging me not to punish my parents by cutting them off and that they missed me. Reading her words, I felt a mixture of emotions, surprise and skepticism. Part of me wants to believe that Vicky has really changed, that she is sincere and willing to work to repair our relationship, but another part of me is still doubtful because this seems too good to be true. However, regardless of what she wrote, I know for sure that my parents do not miss me because if they did, they would not have treated me like that all these years. I thought of sending her an answer, but then I decided not to. After all, forgiveness is not something to rush. It's a process that requires time and reflection. I still don't know if I want to have a relationship with her again. I could forgive her, but that doesn't mean we're finally going to be sisters now. To be honest, after my marriage, I no longer feel alone. I have learned to acknowledge that I have my loving husband by my side, supportive friends, and unwavering love from them. With their support, I know I can face any challenge that comes my way without needing Vicky or my parents in my life. I have also researched and found a good therapist with whom I have booked my first appointment. I have taken this step to address and resolve any wounds from my past and heal from them. Update 4. I think I did well not to answer the email I mentioned in the last update because now everything comes to light. It turns out that Vicky did not write anything and that it was my parents using her account. That's why they were so emphatic that I would forgive my parents because they were the ones who had written it. I know because I happened to meet Vicky one day, and when I greeted her, she looked at me with a disgusted face like she always did. I commented to her about the email, thinking my lack of reply was the problem, and she told me that she had not sent me anything. She took out her phone and found the email in the sent mail tray, but swore that she had not written anything at that time. We both realized who the author was since surely some computer in the house still had Vicky's session open. I also asked her about the housewarming party, and she told me that it had not happened, so as I suspected, it was all a lie from my parents. Then we each went our own way, and that was all. Honestly, I don't know who was worse in my life, my sister or my parents because at this point, my parents are already too twisted. At least now, everyone will know because I made a post on my Instagram with links to my Reddit story so all the family and people close by are reading this story. If you are liking it, follow us for more stories.